back around 1992. I was in high school at that time. I was a sophomore, and unlike most of my friends in school, I didn't work the typical high school jobs like McDonald's, Taco Bell, some retail job in the mall, or work at the local grocery store. I was very good with my hands and worked jobs like construction, demolition, flooring, and auto mechanics. All of my contacts, I worked under the table as I started working on some of these jobs at 14. It was beneficial for both of us, as I was only called in when needed, and I was the guy willing to work only evenings and weekends. One of my contacts worked doing remodeling projects at restaurants, bars, retail shops, and typical commercial projects that we could only work after hours. Like I said, that worked out for both of us because I went to school and would sometimes work after school or weekends. For this one contact, it wasn't uncommon for him to leave me alone at a site and have a list of things for me to do alone, mostly demolition work. I did this while the other crew was doing the installation or remodeling work. I was the kid, but I had their respect because I did what I was supposed to do and did the work of a man without complaints. I got paid well, and in one night I could make more than my friends did working all week at McDonald's. In one instance, I got a call from the guy I worked for, and he said he had a project for me. He asked if I could work the following Saturday, and I said, yeah, sure. He told me to be sure to bring food and lots to drink, as there was nothing nearby. I used to have a small cooler and would fill it with drinks like Cokes, Gatorade, or whatever. Plus chips and a couple of sandwiches. Back then, I could eat a whole pizza by myself and burn it all off. He'd pick me up that Saturday morning because I didn't have a car or a license yet. He would pick me up and drive me to the work sites and leave me alone there. I rarely worked with his other crews, as they were the more skilled labor guys. I was just the tear-out kid. Here is the part that was my major downfall in this story. I didn't pay attention to where we were going. I was too busy talking to him, and I think we were talking about cars. You see, at the time, my goal was to save up enough money to buy an old muscle car and rebuild it. It took a long time to arrive at the site. As we drove up, it was in the middle of nowhere. Now, you may not think California has places like this, but back in the early 1990s, out in the Mojave Desert, yes, there were big plots of land and homes more than a few city blocks apart. I knew we left the highway and went down a few other two-lane highways for a long distance. I remember he asked me about my drinks, and he pulled out a brand new jug of water that he had in his truck that looked like it had been there a while, and told me to take it with me just in case. He said that the water to the house I would be working at was off. As we pulled up to the property, he was in a hurry to drop off tools and get to another work site. I helped him with things like breaker bars, shovels, pry bars, hammers, brooms, several big trash bins, and a small tool bag that I often had with me. He told me that he would be back to pick me up at about 5-6 p.m., as there was no electricity to this site, and it should only take me until then to do what I needed to do. That was always his way of saying, I am only paying you until this time, so you better get everything done by then. It was never too outrageous, and we always had a good understanding of time and tasks. He drove away, and I was at this property all alone. I walked into the house, and it was mostly empty. My job was to remove all remaining furniture, contents, and appliances, remove all the flooring, gut the kitchen and bathrooms, and remove all of the wood paneling. This project was going to be like what we now call a flip. They were going to fix it up and sell it. Almost immediately, I got kind of spooked by the place. It was very odd. Now, mind you, I was used to being on sites alone, working all night. But this was the daytime on a Saturday, and it was bright outside. However, the house was old, dark, musty, and kind of cool inside. The kind of cool that gives you goosebumps. To add to the spook factor, let me describe what I remember about the house. Imagine walking back in time to the 1960s or earlier. It had dark green carpet that looked like matted down broccoli, pine wood everywhere, with a darker stain, old wooden paneling, and old window curtains that all looked like someone's grandma made them. The kitchen had an avocado green sink, stove top, oven, and the stuff that was left behind, like old furniture and a closet full of old stuffed animals that looked to be about 30 years old. The style of this house was like an old western ranch, with wagon wheels both inside and outside the house. I had an old battery-powered radio, but I could only get a few stations. I was just happy for the noise. I started removing all the junk from the house, and as I normally did on a project, if there wasn't a dumpster on site, I made a trash pile. I tore up all the flooring next, and to my delight, everything seemed to come up with ease, and it was rip, cut, and toss. I took a big demo hammer to the kitchen and tore it apart. In less than an hour, I ended up using that big jug of water that my boss had given me to wash my hands and face periodically. By late noon, as most who know the desert, the dryness starts to take moisture from you, especially if you are working in it. So, by late afternoon, I was down to my last drink, and I had already eaten everything I brought. No worries, I thought, as the guys should be here in a couple of hours to pick me up. As the time got closer for them to arrive, I was all done with my tasks, and I even swept the entire place. It was now ready for the rehab crew to get to work making this place look modern. The time of year I was out there, it wasn't a typical hot desert day. But you know, in the desert, as soon as the sun goes down, it starts to cool rapidly. I had a flannel shirt, but that wasn't enough, and it was starting to get dark. This was the time before cell phones were common, and there was no electricity, water, or phone service at the house. I climbed up to get on top of the roof of the house to get a better look and see if I could spot something in the distance. What I saw was a smaller road that this dirt road led to, and a few homes, but those homes were all dark. My first thought was to hike down to a neighbor's house and ask them to use the phone. The nearest house had no one home, and this home also looked abandoned. If you remember, the early 90s were the start of an economic decline and recession. So, it wasn't uncommon to find a lot of foreclosed homes in a tract of homes, many of which I worked on at that time. I started to think about my options as darkness fast approached. One option was to stay at the house until morning. The second was to hike a few miles in the dark Mojave night with what little water I had left. And the third was to wait until early morning and hike out of there towards some sort of civilization. It also suddenly occurred to me that no one knew where I was except my boss. I didn't know if he told anyone else where I was, and certainly my family wouldn't miss me until maybe Sunday night. But I didn't even tell them I was going to work there. They knew me and how much I would work to save up for my car, so they never worried about me not coming home. As full darkness enveloped me, it was amazing looking out at the night sky. Luckily for me, the moon was bright. I didn't have a flashlight or any way to make a fire. Even though I tried, I was going to make a small bonfire out of broken-up construction debris as the temperatures started to fall, probably down to the low 40s. My only option was to go back inside the empty, creepy house that somehow seemed even creepier, sitting alone in the dark. At about 8 p.m., the batteries on my radio, which was my only source of a little light and noise, started to die. I grabbed an old wooden chair and sat in the living room of this house, facing the door. I started hearing the wind, odd noises that I assumed were animals in the distance, and what sounded like leaves cracking underfoot. I was starting to shiver from the cold, so I set off trying to start a fire in the fireplace. It was like Tom Hanks in Cast Away, trying to start a fire. At least, this kept my mind off my situation. Sitting in this living room next to the fireplace, the house seemed even darker than it should have. Mind you, in the daytime, the inside seemed dark, so with only the moonlight, I was pretty much sitting in complete darkness. My mind started to play tricks on me. I was seeing shadows moving outside and inside the house. I was also starting to hear someone talking like whispers or something. I got up from my chair and yelled out, "Hello!" Just as I did, I heard something fall from the other side of the house. I ran over to the door and went outside again. At least in the moonlight, I could see better. But off in the distance, I heard noises and saw movement, but I couldn't make it out. I had my pile of tools by the edge of the house, ready for when my boss picked me up. So I ran over there and grabbed Big Daddy, which was my heavy pry bar that I used in demolition. I was ready to defend myself against whoever or whatever was out there. I had to keep moving, because my undershirt and flannel shirt weren't enough to keep me warm. The wind was also starting to pick up, and as far as I could see, there were no lights around me. I didn't want to try to get back on the house again out of fear of falling in the dark, but I got up on top of the gate just to try and gain a little bit of altitude to see if I could spot some house lights nearby or car lights. My mind went to the stories that circulated around at the time about how people would come up to the Mojave Desert and bury bodies, how there were satanic groups out here, and how people would go missing for no reason out here. Every noise had me on edge, and every shadow had my heart pounding. Now, I knew no one was in that house, but I swear I would hear noises from inside. I huddled up on the front porch, looking into the living room window, expecting to see someone at any moment. By around 11 p.m., I looked at my watch, thinking this was going to be a long night. All this stuff only happened since it got dark. I didn't know how I was going to make it another 6 hours until daybreak. I started thinking, the moment it gets to be daybreak, like the moment light starts to appear on the horizon, I'm going to take the little water I had left and walk east. I knew that going east, I would eventually make it somewhere. The dirt road I was off of led in that direction to a paved road. Closer to midnight, I was wide awake, my eyes fixed on the dirt road, thinking that any time now a car would come down it, and maybe they could call for help for me. I remember, casually, turning to look back into the house. All this time, I kept hearing noises, but I told myself maybe it was a rat or some animal. I saw a shadow of a person move from the kitchen down the hall. I jumped up from sitting down, thinking, that is not an animal. That is a human. I started backing my way out of the porch toward the pile and tripped over debris, falling to the ground. I got up, but fell again. It was like something pushed me down, or it was just my imagination. All of a sudden, these bright lights were coming closer to me as I lay on the ground. I jumped up, and it was my boss. He was looking at me like, "What the heck are you doing?" I was just so glad to see him. I wasn't mad or anything, just asked him what happened. He said that he was sorry, but he thought the other crew was coming to get me, and they thought that he was coming. So no one actually came. He said it wasn't until later in the evening. He asked the other crew leader about how far along I got, and he said I didn't go get him. Well, it took him almost 2 hours from where they were working to come get me. He felt really bad and told me he was going to pay me for the entire time I was out there. He also grabbed a can of Coke from his cooler and asked me if I was thirsty, and I drank that all in one gulp. Once we got back towards civilization, he went through a fast food drive-through, and I ate like I had never eaten before. As he was driving me home, I asked him about the house. I told him how creepy it was. He said he didn't have any information on the house, only just what we were supposed to do. After that, I made sure to always keep extra batteries, a flashlight, and double the amount of liquid.